So you're in the camera right
Welcome to the Speculations Reading Series, a co-production of Dreamhaven Books and SF Minnesota, I think since the fall of 1995, so this would be our 19th season. We're co-sponsored by, as I say, Dreamhaven Books and SF Minnesota, which is a multicultural speculative fiction organization that also does a midsummer convention, Diversicon, and continuing to have speculations readings monthly, usually on Wednesdays. Next month will be Light at Morehouse on Wednesday, March 26th, and then there will be a reading on April 9th. Still working on getting a reader. Tonight we've got Terry Faust, photographer, visual artist, novelist, short story writer. What can't you do?
Bike trailers.
I think about our
trailers too.
I think this is about your 5th appearance in the Speculations Reading Series. So take it away, Terry.
All right. Well, if you can't find a seat here, just kind of move over. Those people that have, like if there's an extra chair next to you, please kind of condense. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you all showing up here this evening. I know it's terrible weather, but it shows that gusto, that Minnesota spirit that we all look at and admire. I've got some new stuff. One of them is terribly appropriate for this weather. It's called A Man Who Knew Too Much and Was Irritating. But it has to do with our Minnesota weather. So I guess I'll just, without further ado, start on that. A Man Who Knew Too Much and Was Irritating. The phone had a needy, whiny ring. I guessed it was Kevin and let my answering machine pick up. It was Kevin, and his impression of a miffed old lady warbled in accusation. Your answering machine is an affront to civilized discourse, young man. In his own high-pitched rasp, he added, Gerald, you've got to hear this. The case is worse than I thought. The papers they released are worthless. God, I had hopes. But we're not beaten. We'll take steps. His use of we made me cringe. Pick up. I have big news. I have to come over and tell you this in person. This is too important for the phone. I'm coming over. I know you're there. He gave me a moment to pick up. I used it to watch the streetlights flicker on through my front window. Heavy flakes of snow spiraled down in their cones of radiance. In an annoyed tone, he continued, people who haven't stood by me, they won't be part of this when it breaks. The media will want interviews. I'm thinking talk shows. This is big. I told you I wrote the priest I know who's the brother-in-law to the president's dog groomer. You realize I'm starting at the top, the president of the frigging United States. There's no point pretending the Navy cares. I got a letter. This is big. He wrote back. I was tempted to pick up and ask who wrote back. The priest? The dog groomer? The president? He went on. I can't say more. I'm on my way. And he hung up. This was not good news. Since Kevin had moved back from California, he'd been bouncing from place to place, couch surfing. It wasn't a wholesome lifestyle for an overweight guy. In his late 60s, he had a history of alcoholism, drug abuse, psychotic episodes, traffic violations, and a lifetime membership in the John Birch Society, which he assured me still existed. In a nutshell, he wore out welcomes faster than a telemarketer. Nobody wanted him. I was one of the dwindling number of his acquaintances who occasionally talked to him. As a result, I was considered a close personal friend. I looked at my options. Not answering the doorbell wouldn't stop him from hammering on the door. He wasn't beyond standing on my doorstep shouting, even traipsing over to my neighbor's house, asking if I was in. Once he dialed 911, explaining he'd suspected I'd been neuralized in an attempted extraterrestrial abduction. People who didn't know him laughed when I described his antics. They thought he was hilarious. The phone rang again, and not thinking, I answered. Gerald, what's your address? These streets were designed by 2-year-olds. Where the hell am I? If you'd invite me over more often, like friends do, maybe I wouldn't get lost. I'd never invited him over. I gave him my address, and though I was tempted to give him an address across town, the trouble was he didn't listen. What? I'm passing the Ritz Cafe on 42nd Avenue. Where are you? I resigned myself to staying on the phone and talking him through the directions, like a control tower guiding down a lost airplane. You're going to be so excited, he said. You won't believe it. Fine, sure. I had to admit, he'd raised my curiosity about what I wasn't sure. Put on some coffee. Do you have any pastry? No pastry, I said. Some host. You should always be prepared for guests. Did you grow up in a barn? His car pulled up moments later, and the morbidly obese butterball of a man pried himself out using a cane. The street was filling with snow, and the yards were covered with a foot of the stuff. The winter had been brutal with record lows. I watched from the living room as he slowly teetered across the treacherous road, puffing great clouds of steam in the orange sodium vapor light, his cane tapping ahead of him as if searching for landmines. Gaining my side of the street, he labored forward and cast irate looks about as if winter were a personal insult, totally directed at him. I opened the door and he said, Don't you have any salt? My God, I've crossed easier hockey rinks. Don't you know you can hire people to clear your walk? His aggravating questions were rhetorical and required no response. Delivering comebacks only prolonged his stay. So, what's the important news? I asked. Give me a second, I'll whip, all right? Let me get my coat off. Jesus, what smells in here? Considering soap was one of the few chemicals he didn't ingest or otherwise use, I ignored the remark. Sit on the couch, I'll get your coffee. His puffing and wheezing had once caused me to worry, but he'd brooked no medical, social, or psychological advice. He wouldn't see a doctor. I'd resigned myself to his self-destruction, though it didn't stop him from complaining about my lack of concern. He lowered himself onto the couch and gave the room a critical scan. My modest rambler was one of 9 houses along the block. Who does your decorating, Pee Wee Herman? Here, I offered him a mug of coffee, which he sipped, and then made a face. God, what is this? Colombian. Don't you know how to make coffee? I've had better coffee at Mickey's Diner. You think you deserve better? I had to return fire once in a while. He laughed. Touché. You're right, of course. I'm a worthless bag of shit. I nodded and said, agreed. Now, what do you have to say that's so important? First, close those drapes. It's too easy to see me from outside. An outside observer would have to be determined. The house on the opposite side of the street was barely visible through the swirl of snow. On top of that, a spy would probably freeze to death. But I closed the drapes. To be honest, I wasn't that keen on having my neighbors see Kevin in my living room. I told you, the Navy finally released its classified papers on Area 68, he said. According to Kevin, Area 68 was supposed to be a super-secret installation under the little southwestern Minnesota farm town of Hypothermia. Kevin was convinced it was the launch site of an alien invasion. The papers are rubbish, pure trash, he spat. They deny everything. If they think they're fooling anyone, suddenly his anger vanished. I didn't know you had a cat. Mo, our 2-year-old tabby, sniffed Kevin's ankle. My wife and I had picked her out of the Humane Society. I imagined Kevin presented an irresistible olfactory experience. Her name is Mo, I said. Ha, what a ridiculous name. Animals love me. Come here, sweetie. Mo backed away from his outstretched hand. Her sense of smell satisfied, she ambled off to the kitchen. God, what an antisocial creature. There must be something wrong with her. What is it you have to tell me in person? I asked again. No, not much for small talk, are you? That's a personality flaw upon which you should work. Studies show you can't succeed without social skills. You should really think about that. I treasure your sage advice, Kevin. Now, what do you want? Unfazed, he replied, I got a letter back from Father Peterson, the priest with connections to President Tilson. The balls of that guy! What a load of crap! He won't pressure his brother-in-law to get the president involved. It's pure crap. Part of a cover-up, solid proof of what I've been saying all along. I posted his letter on my Facebook page this morning. He'll see where obfuscation gets him. This is big. I imagine it's gone viral by now. He'll answer to the American public. He stared at me, expecting some kind of reaction. I asked, well, what did he say? My God, Gerald, are you obtuse? I imagine you, of all people, would get excited. See the importance of this. What, Kevin? People post letters on Facebook all the time. It's where you go to rant. How's this prove anything? This priest doesn't even know anything about Area 68, does he? How's this different from any other crackpot posting? How's it different? He's trying to bury this by ignoring me. His indifference is criminal. I'm talking about national security. After what I've experienced, this is a slap in the face. I won't put up with it. I was privy to what Kevin had experienced, unfortunately. He had informed me that he'd rediscovered God in the Catholic Church last week while drinking wild turkey and gulping tranquilizers. He claimed his Catholicism was back in full force. Though he scoffed at the idea of attending church and confession, he dismissed my idea that church might be an interactive organization. God had spoken to him directly, given him a mission, expose the truth about the extraterrestrial threat. I knew it was a mistake to open my mouth, but I said, your Catholic friend might realize his brother-in-law doesn't have a lot of influence in the White House. I kind of doubt the president invites dog groomers to cabinet meetings. Kevin started in disgust and disbelief. What did I expect? Am I the only one who understands what's going on? This is all on me. Must I do everything? I can't believe you're not appalled. Don't you even care? Frankly, Kevin, I don't give a damn. Kevin had teetered off the outer rim of my Minnesota nice some time ago. Do you think we should set up a website? He asked. There was that we again. You know about that stuff, he said. We could use it to spread the word. I often wondered if he heard anything but his own voice. Kevin, I've told you, I'm not interested in joining your crusade. My crusade? It's not my crusade. This affects everyone. Aliens are here, and it's just a matter of time. They control the postal system and several fast food restaurants. Have you been to the House of Pancakes lately? My God! And those are just the organizations I know of. But believe me, they're attacking on more levels than you can imagine. Why do you think Father Patterson refused to pass my message to the president? Because you're a total unknown, nut spouting wild conspiracy theories? Your interpretation is appallingly ignorant. They've infiltrated the Catholic Church, too. The Vatican is still safe, but who knows for how long? God is fighting back, Gerald. He has given me this mission. Are you questioning God's word? Kevin, you need medical attention, a psychiatrist. I've never felt better in my life. This is the first time I've seen things so clearly. Everything is transparent to me. I have no doubt. I'm elated. Did you take more drugs this morning? I'm God's weapon, his sword of justice. I'll smite the aliens, and all will see what I've done and revere me. He'd claimed to be the legitimate heir to the throne of Luxembourg for about a week before he was forced to abdicate and take up his current mission. Kevin, you need rest. Exactly! I hope you stock your pantry better than your pastry cabinet. Poached eggs with lightly toasted wheat bread and fresh orange juice. It must be hand-squeezed. What? Breakfast, you fool! I have to stay here the night. Luckily for you, I've already had my supper, though a brandy snifter and a cigar before bed would be the civilized offer. You have plenty of time to shop, since you're so ill-equipped. You can't stay here. I appreciate your concern. This place does need a good cleaning, and the decor is appalling. However, I've learned to survive poor housekeeping. I'll manage. No, Kevin, I don't want you here. You're not welcome. You cannot stay. He laughed at my explanations and rejected them with a wave. Nonsense. They've staked out the place I am at now. They're moving in everywhere. I can't go back there. It would endanger all those innocent lives. He was staying at a homeless shelter. They'll try to stop me, Gerald. Even if you don't care about me, think about the children. What children? At the shelter, you nitwit. Would you want the harm that may come to them on your febrile conscience? Think of the innocent families. Little Timmy and Buttons, his puppy, and old man Sedgwick, veteran of 2 wars. I'm doing you a favor. I picked up his coffee cup and went to the kitchen and dumped the contents in the sink. I needed a few deep breaths and time to count to 10. By the count of 15, I was somewhat calm. Mo looked up from her food bowl. He's not staying here, I told her, and meant it. What are you mumbling about out there? Did you find a Danish? I marched into the living room and picked up his cane. With my other hand, I tried to grasp his flabby arm and lift him. I might have tried lifting a 400-pound cuttlefish. Get up, I said. You're leaving. I didn't invite you here, and I don't want you here. Your interpersonal skills have taken a definite nosedive, Gerald. I think you need to calm down and think this over. In trying to use both hands to lift him, the cane I held rapped him across the side of his head. It was an accident. Jesus, I'm getting up already, he cried. I was astounded. A small smack on the head did more good than all my talk. I'd have to remember that. Here's your coat, I said, and lifted it from the chair by the front door. I still held his cane, and I must admit, I held it in a manner that some might consider threatening. He lumbered to the door and said, "Using violence on a visitor. This is shabby treatment indeed. There was a day when guests were respected. I'm really disappointed in you, Gerald." I opened the door and made sure he was through it before handing him his cane. "Watch the steps," I said. "Very funny, Gerald. I thought you knew the meaning of friendship." "I do, but friends listen, and you don't. Friends have some respect." "Listen," he said, "to your trite drivel? I ignore it. You should thank me." "Kevin, as a friend, I say you need help. You need to lose weight. Stop drinking. Stop taking drugs. And see a doctor." He huffed. "I'm on to something big, Gerald. But if you're too ignorant to see that, well, so be it." And with that, he pulled the door shut himself. I switched on the door light. Through the front door glass, I watched his shape slowly but successfully descend my steps and shuffle out to the street. The cat rubbed against my leg. I reached down and picked her up, setting her on my shoulder, and we watched Kevin blend into the snowfall. I said to Mo, "You're safe now. The weird man has gone." She nuzzled my ear. The glass in the door was textured and blurred the scene somewhat. I intended to shift to the front window and peek through the drapes to make sure Kevin made it to his car, but a low rumble caused Mo to latch her claws into my shoulder. It was painful, and I stroked her, hoping she'd relax. The street was suddenly awash with light and sound. The house vibrated, and the outdoors came alive. Mo meowed wildly and attempted to leap from my shoulder without releasing her claws. I gripped her, trying to get her off. It dawned on me that the noise must be a snowplow, but it was fantastically loud. I felt an increasing wave of sound through the soles of my slippers. It burst like thunder against the house. Lightning flashes blasted the front window, nearly blinding me. Snowplow flashes? The tumult reached a crescendo, making Mo dig in even more. "Ah!" I cried, and bent down to the chair to get her off my shoulder. I couldn't recall ever hearing or seeing such a loud and bright plow. I wanted to get a look. The light and sound peaked and began to diminish, passing the front of my house. In my frantic efforts to dislodge Mo, I'd forgotten about Kevin. I couldn't imagine him not noticing the plow. But he wasn't quick on his feet. Still, the driver must keep an eye out for pedestrians. I opened the door and looked out. In the thick swirl of snow, I saw the retreating lights and heard the rumble die away. Kevin was nowhere in sight. His car remained parked across the street, its driver's door half open, but it looked empty. "Kevin," I called from my doorstep. The quiet hiss of falling snow and the distant grumble of the plow were my only answers. I pulled on my pack boots and rushed out. The below-zero air burned my nose and cut through my thin shirt. A fresh ridge of snow curved around his car, but there was no sign of him. In the street, flurries whipped at me, but I ran up the block in the direction the demon plow had gone. There was nothing. I returned. His car was definitely empty. Peeking from under the snow beside his open door was the handle of his cane. 2 policemen searched for Kevin. Snowbanks were probed. The neighbors were interviewed. I was baffled. The cops were not so much baffled as suspicious. They questioned my story, obviously doubting it. I hadn't said much. An investigator came to my home and sat exactly where Kevin had sat. I brought him a cup of coffee, which he sipped. He said, "What is this?" After everything, I was in no mood for more abuse, but he smiled and added, "It's good." He then said, "My brother runs a coffee shop." He took another sip and closed the incident report in his lap, then looked at me sitting across from him. He was middle-aged with a lined and baggy face. The corners of his eyes had laugh lines, but he wasn't laughing. I'd expected Jack Webb or Carl Malden. He looked more like the dairy farmer that owned the property my dad took us to for hunting when I was a kid. Short, wiry hair, compact, with a very patient air. He twisted his lips and said, "And you have no idea where he might have gone. He didn't mention a place he was going after he left you. Like I said, he talked about the shelter where he was staying, that was all. And the nature of his visit to you." That was tough. I was reluctant to describe Kevin's crusade. He wanted to stay here, I told him he couldn't, and he left. And the detective obviously expected more and waited. I looked down. Mo would come out to sniff the inspector and jumped in my lap. He continued to wait as I scratched her ear. "Here's the thing," he finally said. "The only section of the street plowed was in front of your house. What? The plow marks are just out front. The city's plows didn't hit the residential streets until this morning. There was no plows working your neighborhood last night. None of them were out when your friend Kevin disappeared. He looked at me and I got a sinking feeling. Now, Gerald, the investigator said, let's go over your story one more time. The end. Now, is that appropriate for this one or what? All right, that one I just wrote, and it's kind of an ode to a friend I had who isn't quite that extreme, but close. Alrighty. This is one I wrote quite a while back, and actually, Jason, this was in response to a story you had written. So, this should be interesting. See if you can remember any of the details or how they might link up with something that you may have written a while back. It's called Reruns of Another Planet. We'll let Eric sit here.
Thank you very much.
Reruns of Another Planet. The gears of the old hand drill whirled as Dr. Meister cranked its stubby handle. It more resembled an antique egg beater than a surgical tool, and with each turn, he recalled the situation that had reduced him to this primitive tool and his makeshift operating room. The reason was professional jealousy. Yes, he was sure of it. And the obtuse thinking of his peers. Peers? Ha! Their infantile minds feared his genius. But he must not think of that now, must not let it distract him. He had to concentrate on his operation. The drill's bit spun ineffectually against the exposed skull bone of one Corporal Rod Gienenberry, currently on mental disability leave from the 2nd Division 156th Footsore Regiment of the Delphi Prime Space Commandos. The patient's head was clamped in a makeshift frame anchored to the operating table. A square-inch section of his red hair and scalp had been peeled back to expose raw bone. A drill guide, tightly strapped onto the patient's upper head, ensured the bit's angle and stability. So, Corporal Greenberry, Dr. Meister began conversationally, cranking a little faster. It's Gienenberry, sir, the corporal corrected, his vowels soft as Tesian yogurt, a common trait amongst the lower ranks of the Delphi Prime armies. Of course, of course. Corporal Cranberry, any sensations, any crippling, stabbing pain, except for the brilliant light directly over the patient's head. The room was dim. Overstocked utility shelves lurked in the dusty corners. An ion mop and an atomic floor polisher were set against one wall. White plastiboard boxes labeled sanitizer, gloves, and gowns had been stacked against the other wall, so as if to clear a space in the cramped room for an operating table, which was, in fact, the case. The doctor pressed harder on the drill and cranked with determination, but it found no purchase. Despite the supporting framework, Corporal Gienenberry's head jiggled. Not to complain, sir, but can't the hospital afford one of them fancy electric drills? You're lucky to be getting treatment, Dr. Meister snapped. There's a war on, you know. However, if it weren't for the pompous, short-sighted surgical council of Delphi Prime's military hospital, he, Dr. Major Emmanuel Meister, would have an electric drill, with a sharp drill bit. He'd have the proper nursing staff, a full operating theater, and the recognition his genius deserved. Perspiration broke out on the doctor's forehead. He put his weight into drilling. After several seconds of fruitless effort, he threw up his hands and cried, "Wayne!" He jerked the drill from the guide and examined the drill tip. "Wayne, you sorry excuse for an assistant, where are you?" From the shadows, a misshapen, humpbacked dwarf of a man limped forward. Flipping up his eye patch, he squinted down at the undrilled section of Corporal Genenberry's skull and shrugged. "Damn it, Wayne, I need a shark drill. Can't you even get me a shark drill?" Wayne's face brightened at the opportunity to serve, and he smiled up at the doctor, taking the hand drill and clutching it to his chest. "Oh, yes, master. Right away, master." "It's Meister, you imbecile!" the doctor exclaimed. "Dr. Major Meister!" Wayne tugged at his forelock and nodded, then scurried to the far end of the table and turned his back to the doctor. After a moment of patting his pockets, he fished out a rusted nail file and went to work. Dr. Meister took a deep cleansing breath and said to the corporal, "I have to apologize for Wayne. It's so hard to get good help. But don't you worry. We'll get that personnel dispersion electrode in place in a nano-jiffy." "And all them voices, they'll go away?" Corporal Genenberry pleaded. "No more persons named Scotty saying, 'I cannot deny the laws of physics.' No more, 'Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a magician.'" "That's what I'm here to fix," Dr. Meister said. "Oh, you's an angel, a true angel, Doc. You's the only one that believes me." Dr. Meister made a deprecating noise and waved his hand magnanimously. "Nothing's too good for our fighting men. Your delusions are serious stuff. It's not your fault this place is run by incompetents." "They're so real, the voices are. Where did they come from, Doc?" "My guess is that they're transmitted from a distant galaxy where there are people much like us." The doctor rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I've seen this condition before." He actually hadn't, but studies showed that appearing knowledgeable could be just as important as clinical hygiene. And isn't it the truth? "You have to stop them, Doc. You don't know what it's like. Beam me up, beam me down, all night long. A person can't sleep." "Well, you have to understand this procedure is highly experimental and involves delicately retuning your brainwaves with our latest interplanetary VHF computer modeling program." "Oh, bless you, sir. Them's voices will be gone?" Corporal Genenberry stared intently up at the doc, his eyes filled with emotion and expectation. Dr. Meister shot his cuffs, coughed, and focused on tightening an already tight screw on the patient's head clamp. "I can safely say that the chances are nearly 100% your troubles will be over when I'm through with you." At that instant, Wayne spun around proudly and held up the drill bit. He blew on the newly sharpened tip, wiped it on his lab coat's lapel, and put away his file. With a brilliant, lopsided grin, he exclaimed, "It's sharper!" Hours later, Corporal Genenberry's eyelids fluttered, and he moaned. "Look, Wayne, look!" Dr. Meister whispered. "He's alive!" Wayne nodded and reluctantly dug a battered wallet from his back pocket, then paused and thought. "A bet's a bet, Wayne," the doctor chided. Wayne handed over the bill, but said, "You still owe me for the last two, master." Yes, Dr. Meister said. He was so delighted by his patient's survival that he pocketed the bill without arguing with Wayne. The doctor put his fingers to his lips. "Now quiet. We don't want hospital security to find us and kick us out again." Wayne mimicked the doctor's finger to his lips, shushing himself in agreement. Corporal Genenberry lay in a large, brightly lit room now. He'd been wheeled in on a gurney, which was positioned next to the brushed metal wall full of gauges and push buttons, sensor outlets, and rapidly blinking, light-emitting diodes. The kind of blinking lights that always denote intense computational activity. A plain white sheet was pulled up to his chin, with enough surplus to cover his head if needed. A bundle of hair-like wires snaked out of his drilled and bandaged head, and entered various wall plugs. The rest of the room was barren, save for a metal chair and an office desk displaying an operating news network video monitor. The sound had been muted. A video news program proclaimed, "Delphi Prime War suffers setbacks. Omnian Space Force press attacks." Below the main headline, a new line popped up in explosive graphics. "Smart bombs keep civilian casualties to a mere 96,000. News at 6. "Where am I?" Corporal Jeanenberry mumbled. "Oh, me head." "Shh! You mustn't make noise," Dr. Meister cautioned. "You're now in the hospital's master computer room." Wayne giggled. "Meister computer room?" Dr. Meister simply glared at Wayne, then said to Jeanenberry, "You've come through the operation with flying colors, Corporal. We've already tracked down the portion of your brain receiving the voices. Apparently, they took root in the fanfic portion of your hippocampus. We're now set to eliminate them." The doctor wrung his hands in eager anticipation. "Wayne, prepare to fire the inverse personality electrotransducer." Wayne's thumb hovered over a large red button. "Ready, Master!" Corporal Jeanenberry's eyes suddenly widened, and he tried to sit up. Surprised by his patient's animation, the doctor grabbed Corporal Jeanenberry's shoulders, attempting to keep him immobile. But Jeanenberry struggled. Wayne produced a large wooden mallet and raised it to strike the corporal. "No, you imbecile! Do you want to ruin our work? Hold him down!" Jeanenberry clawed at thin air and shouted, "Long-range scanners, Mr. Sulu! They're out there! I can feel them!" And he reached out to the computer wall. "A surprise attack!" "What's he talking about, Master?" But Dr. Meister didn't have a chance to answer or even make an educated guess. A hospital klaxon bleated its deafening space warning. "Seek shelter. Attack imminent. Seek shelter." The intercom blared. "Oh, not now," Dr. Meister said. "We're so close." Unbeknownst to Dr. Meister and Wayne, the video news monitor shifted its view to a formation of pointy silver spaceships cruising through the inky void of space. A female newscaster in the studio foreground talked earnestly but silently to the camera. A rapidly traveling text bar passed beneath her, reading, "Invasion watch for Delphi Prime. Stay inside and away from windows. Invasion likely until midnight." "Red alert, battle stations!" Corporal Jeanenberry cried. His voice assumed command, his vowels suddenly becoming firm and crisp. The lights on the computer's wall abruptly flashed with newfound intensity. Jeanenberry pushed Wayne and the doctor away and sat erect, staring into the distance. "Come about to a heading of 3.250. Prepare all photon torpedoes. Charge phasers." Dr. Meister was relieved when it became apparent that Corporal Jeanenberry would not jump down. The doctor gestured for Wayne to stand back. Wayne lifted his mallet suggestively, but the doctor shook his head. "Keep it ready, Wayne. Let's see where the corporal's going with this." Dr. Meister studied the wall of madly flashing lights, then peered into one of Jeanenberry's eyes and checked his pulse. Curiously, his voices are putting up a fight. "Stand by the transducer, Wayne." "Fire a full spread of torpedoes on my command," Corporal Jeanenberry commanded no one in particular. From the computer wall came, "Aye, Captain, invent the relief ports." "Give 'em everything you got, Scotty," Jeanenberry answered. Dr. Meister and Wayne stared at the blinking wall in confusion and disbelief. For a second they exchanged worried looks. Meister cleared his throat thank you, and laughed nervously. "Well, that was certainly different." "Yep," Wayne said. Once more he pantomimed bonking Corporal Jeanenberry on the head, but the doctor waved the mallet down. "I think the transducer will take care of this. On my command." "Hard to starboard!" Corporal Genenberry cried. "Fire phasers!" "Firing forward phasers, Captain," the computer responded. The news video monitor's silver spaceships broke ranks as beams of light struck the foremost ship. At the same moment, the computer room door flew open and 3 burly attendants strode in, their titanium-toed boots clacking on the tiles. All 3 were dressed in hospital white and held straitjackets. The doctor quickly pulled the sheet up over Corporal Genenberry and tried to stand between the attendants and his sitting patient. "Good day, gentlemen. Can we help you?" Dr. Meister asked innocently. The attendants glared at the doctor. Through the door behind them stepped a tall man in a trim burgundy tunic of a Delphi Army colonel in the medical corps. His iron-gray hair was cut to a perfect horizon. Cobalt blue eyes took in Dr. Meister and Wayne as the 2 pretended nonchalance and closed ranks in front of the shrouded Corporal Genenberry. Carefully removing supple leather gloves from his talon-like fingers, the officer snorted in contempt. He held out his hand and, with a look of annoyance, said, "The mallet, Wayne." Wayne blushed and nodded reluctantly, surrendering his mallet. Then the officer pressed easily between the doctor and Wayne and gently pulled the sheet from Corporal Genenberry. The unfortunate corporal stared blankly back. "What's all this, then?" the officer asked Meister. Dr. Meister spun around and stared wide-eyed with feigned surprise. "Good heavens, Wayne, you were right! There was somebody under the sheet!" "Major Meister, it's time for you and Wayne to return to your nice, quiet rooms." "No, this is all a mistake. I'm a doctor," Meister pleaded. "You have no right to stop this operation." "Take them and unplug this poor devil." The room suddenly shook as the rumble of an enemy bombardment reached the computer room. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the attendants wobbled. Dr. Meister and Wayne gripped Corporal Genenberry's bed for support. The colonel stood rock solid and, looking up at the ceiling, said, "Damned Omnian surprise attack. Curse those bobble-headed bastards." "Emergency power to the forward shields," Corporal Genenberry suddenly snapped. "Target their weapon arrays and engine compartments. Take out their satellite dishes. Fire phasers." "Aye, Captain," the computer answered. "That'll teach the scum." The colonel raised his eyebrows and looked from the computer to Meister. "So, ventriloquism has been added to your talents, Major?" "You can't stop this treatment," Dr. Meister insisted. "I'm making medical history." "Of course you are," the colonel said patiently, and nodded to the attendants. They grabbed the doctor and his assistant, while the 3rd moved to the wall to unplug Corporal Genenberry. "Sir," the 3rd attendant said after looking at the monitor. "What is it, Larson?" Larson gazed at the monitor. "I think you should see this. The news video monitor. Look." The colonel strode around the desk and planted himself in front of the screen. "Turn it up." The monitor squawked. "And with 0% financing, you can't afford not to buy your new shuttle now. Poor credit? No credit. No problem. Push, shove, transport your current shuttle to Wally's Shuttle Emporium." A used space shuttle blot filled the screen. The colonel scratched his chin and gave Larson a doubtful look. "No, sir. After the commercial break. The news." The ad gave way to images of bent and twisted spaceships, formerly pointy and silver, rolling helplessly in space. A saucer-shaped craft with 2 protruding nacelles sprouting from its back zipped amongst them. The female commentator appeared in the corner of the screen saying, "And this just in an incredible display of military prowess, a single Delphi Prime starship incapacitated an entire Omnian squadron as it began bombing Delphi Prime's principal military medical facility. The Delphi crew claims ghosts took over the systems and performed feats of ship handling and weapons targeting never seen before." "Ghosts, eh?" The colonel ran his fingers through his sparse hair. "That's a crock." Colonel, my patient is in the middle of a serious operation, Maester whined. I must finish. The colonel waved to Larson. Disconnect Corporal Gienenberry and take him to the emergency room. To Maester, the colonel said, You're lucky he's still alive. Corporal Gienenberry fought briefly as the plugs were pulled from the wall jacks. He went limp. Then the computer said, He's dead, Jim. The news monitor's view followed the Delphi ship as it abruptly slew left and right and crunched a nacelle against an Omnian wreck. The colonel snorted in contempt at this. Ghosts, damn media. Wayne coughed gently for attention. His arms were now wrapped tightly in a straitjacket. When the colonel ignored him, he coughed louder in a humming fashion that was hard to discount. The colonel rolled his eyes, but pointed to the misshapen assistant. What is it? If I might be so bold, Colonel, I think I see a kind of crazy connection here. The colonel looked down at Wayne. Oh, really? You see a connection? A connection to what? The colonel said with infinite sarcasm. As Maester's assistant, Wayne was immune to sarcasm. Sir, said Wayne, and tilted his head to the monitor. I think it's a connection between that spaceship and poor old Corporal Gienenberry there. It was Dr. Maester's turn to roll his eyes. Wayne, do you honestly think you are qualified to fathom the psychological complexities of a multi-personality disorder, much less hypothesize with any degree of accuracy? No, sir. I don't have an imaginary degree like you. Well, now, Dr. Maester shrugged his now bound shoulders, as if Wayne's inferiority was manifest. There you go, then. Despite Maester's dismissal, the attendants looked at the monitor and then to the colonel in obvious question. The colonel snapped the monitor off and poked a finger into Wayne's hollow chest. Listen here, my one-eyed, bumpy-backed friend. There is no way a person like that, he pointed at the corporal, could ever be considered officer material. Wayne shrugged and said, Just a thought, sir, just a thought. He bowed to the colonel's superior knowledge. The attendants hustled Maester and Wayne from the computer room. Corporal Gienenberry's remaining plugs were carefully extracted, and he was wheeled away. The ER was prepped for bombardment injuries, which, due to the valiant fight of the single Delphi starship, never occurred. So, when the lifeless body of Corporal Gienenberry was wheeled in, an emergency team, with time on their hands, decided to try reviving him. With the defibrillator paddles in place, the lead doctor said, Stand clear! The nurses complied. A faraway look entered the doctor's eye, and he gestured at his technician at the defibrillator controls with a flick of his wrist. Engage. Miraculously, the corporal's heart started beating. In moments, he awoke with an overwhelming desire for tea, Earl Grey, hot. I don't think I have to explain that one. So how are we doing on time here?
I think we about another 7 minutes worth. Forgot to pass out the sign-in.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure out which story you were talking about of mine.
But did you figure it out?
Yeah, when you said multiple personality disorder, yeah.
There you go. Well, let's see now. Well, here's a short one that I could do pretty quick.
That looks fine.
If you read the Acadia one, I read this. This was actually a response to a loft competition. They wanted something that had to do with, gosh, what was it? It was a solar eclipse, and I don't think they had too many entries like this, but I could only think of one movie, Day of the Triffids, in which there was a meteor shower that blinded everyone. They thought, well, that's close enough to a solar eclipse. I designed this one. And it had to be 700 words, which was kind of fun. Cape Town, November 4th. I remember November 3rd like it was yesterday. It was the day my bandages came off, and I learned I would see again. Actually, I could see all along. My clever play acting, placing toadstool caps over my eyes to amuse my fellow scientists during my presentation at the Medicinal Mushrooms Conference, had been a ruse. Claiming they were poisonous and feigning blindness, I swooned into the alabaster arms of my beautiful assistant, Nancy. Surprisingly, the room emptied at the same moment, leaving us alone. "Is anyone there?" I pleaded, groping for her female form. She'd applied bread bandages made from the luncheon platter. Her angelic voice answered, "They all rushed out onto the veranda to watch the solar eclipse, Doctor." I reached out and grasped her firm young hands, saying, "You'll stay with me, won't you, Nancy? I expect my life as a sightless invalid, with years of therapy, will require numerous sponge baths. It's Natalie, and wouldn't sponge baths be rather intimate? Not between soulmates. Oh, Nellie, it's like we've known each other for an eternity. I started last week, Doctor, but it certainly is beginning to feel like an eternity." "What's that screaming?" "Oh, Doctor, your colleagues, it's horrible. Their eyes are melting." Damn it. It must be the solar eclipse. The imbeciles? Had they no protection? Smoked glass, smoked grass, the medicinal effects of mushrooms and various other hallucinogenic plants had drawn me into this field. "You're talking nonsense," I told her, and peeled away the cucumber sandwiches she'd used as bandages. The eclipse had done its worst. My fellow scientists were a mass of whimpering humanity, different from the dolts with whom I breakfasted in only one regard, their melted eyes. "Naomi, if this happened here, it must be happening all over the world." She was scared, but not panicky. If I could add a bit more terror, she'd likely seek my comfort. "The world? How could that be, Doctor? And it's Natalie. And how come you can see?" I offered a bite of my bandage and extolled the virtues of my recuperative physique. "Well, Doctor, if you're right, I'm just thankful that no malevolent species of flesh-eating bipedal fungi exist at this vulnerable moment in human history, so as to threaten mankind's very existence." She'd said a mouthful, and I took a bite of my bandage, chewed silently, and cursed her unwitting irony. After lunch, I planned to surprise the world with a troupe of truffles I'd secretly trained to tango. Decades of lab work and intensive movement classes had positioned my creations to win me the coveted Fandango Fungi Fellowship. My mincing mutations also excelled at theoretical physics, web design, and global economic theory. "Natasha, you may see trouble with truffles, but I see opportunity. The only way genetically engineered intelligent fungi could become violent, carnivorous monsters is if they were saturated by intense solar radiation focused through the gravitational field of the moon. And that could only happen during a solar eclipse, Doctor? I'm the scientist here, young lady, but I'll grant you, if such a thing happened, you'd be perfectly safe. They know my voice and obey me." She had no time to ask who obeyed me, as my tango troupe pranced out onto the veranda and began satiating themselves on the sightless scientists. It was too disgusting to watch. The choreography was all wrong, their timing, the execution, a disaster. I finished my sandwich in disgust and looked into Nancy's blue eyes. "If this is happening here," I said, "then truffles will be eating humans worldwide." It was a gross exaggeration, a long shot, but how else was I going to drive her into my arms? "Perhaps you should ask them to stop. Stop? Ha! Past conference committees mocked my work with mushrooms, teased my toadstools, and laughed at my lichen. Who's laughing now? You're mad, Doctor. Mad for you. I pressed her delicate hands to my lips and apologized for the crumbs. You understand, Nancy? It's up to us to mate and keep the human spirit alive. I don't see how that could be anything but mutually exclusive, Doctor. With time, I'm sure you'd come to love me. That's one learning curve I'd rather not climb. And with that, she threw herself into the seething mass of feeding fungi. It was like my high school prom all over again. I knew we were through. My overriding zeal for science and love of free-spirited fungal frolic had once again stood in the way of a meaningful relationship. I cursed my enormous IQ and sensitive, inverted nature. I looked for some dill sauce for my remaining cucumber sandwich and warned Nina. Tomorrow, I'd check Craigslist for a new assistant.